because I also think there's a massively positive side to having ADHD, because I don't believe that I would be as successful in my chosen profession or career if I didn't have ADHD.
It's hard because there's lots of people that have done amazing things in spite of their ADHD, and I think that's a message we've got to get the balance right.
If I've got something in my mind, I'm going to get it, I'm going to achieve it, and I'm going to be relentless in pursuit of whatever it is. It's definitely part of that DNA makeup that the ADHD brings to the table.
There's no shame in having a broken arm. Why is there shame in having a bit of a mindset that's not quite right, that somebody needs to help you fix? That's the mission. We talk about it a lot. We use that word, don't we, a lot?
Once I've realised I got ADHD, I thought I'm going to actually put all of that just back into the things that matter. And then I went on to do a master's, because I had actually the mental energy to do it rather than concentrating on chaos.
If you haven't done well at school, or school's not going great, you know, we're told by society you're a failure, when actually that is far from the reality. Some of the leading politicians, world leaders, you know, elite sports stars, they've all been diagnosed with these things later in life, and they've all gone on to incredible, amazing things.
Rebecca, Jordan, Phil, I'm looking forward to this. Why are we all here, Phil?
You have got one hell of a backstory in the context of ADHD, and now a story of what you're doing now, and I'm fascinated to unpick that with you. And Rebecca, we've brought you into the mix as somebody who's got both lived experience of ADHD, but also a vast amount of professional experience of ADHD. And I think if we can ignite a fire between the two, the conversation and the dialogue's going to be incredible, isn't it? And just in the warm-up that we've had and what have you, I'm really excited about this period of bringing you two together. We've talked, and before we roll the camera, you're ex-army. Did you have ADHD, or were you diagnosed with ADHD when you went into the army?
No, only in the last 12, 18 months or so was I become aware that I had ADHD through a diagnosis. For me, before then, it was just normal life. You know, it was how I knew the world. And to be honest, the diagnosis came through a series of breakups in relationships in my personal life, and me going to therapy and counselling, and often the same pattern of behaviour was reoccurring, and I was constantly getting told by the various psychiatrists, counsellors, therapists, have you ever been checked for ADHD? You should go and get checked. And then one day I thought, well, my sister actually said to me, if you know, you'll always end up back in the same place if you don't change something. And yeah, I ended up going to get a private diagnosis. I actually went to the UK National Health Service, but the wait list is phenomenal to get any sort of treatment. So we had to go private and pay for it. Yeah, and I was diagnosed, and yeah, the rest is history, so to speak.
Why do you think you took so long? Because you're someone that embraces that sort of self-development, be the best version of yourself. If people were saying to you, you know, maybe you've got ADHD, go and get tested, was there something that was stopping you?
No, I don't think so. I think I sort of had this mentality of, so what if I have? It's just who I am. So what's it going to change, or what's it going to matter? But what I have come to learn is I'm actually so much more aware of the traits and the perhaps perceived negative characteristics of my behaviour, that now I can control them. You know, simple things like, you know, I was always like cut people out in a conversation because my brain's already on to the next phase of the discussion, and I would interrupt, and to you that would be very, it would be rude, it would be disrespectful. But I'm not trying to be, it's just like my brain's already 10 steps ahead. So I think one of my family members said to me recently that they're a greater beneficiary of me being diagnosed than I am. Yeah. And I think that's probably true, because I'm so much more empathetic, because I'm consciously thinking about how do my actions or words affect people, as opposed to normally I'm just so hyper-focused on whatever it is I'm doing that I neglect relationships. That's my, you know, I don't think I'm a bad person. I've never cheated or purposely hurt anyone. But what I have been very selfish with, from their perspective, is my time, because I'm just so driven on, this is the mission, we've got it against all costs, relentless in pursuit of it. Doesn't matter what else is going on outside of that. And that's been a tragedy in my most important relationships with people like the mother of my daughter, fiance.
You're nodding.
I completely relate to what you just said, my life, really. Right. Completely relate to all of that, completely relate to all of that. And I think from my perspective, there are some similarities and some differences, but like I think people would look at me and think, oh, you've done really well, you're quite successful in the career that I love, which makes a difference, but at a cost of a lot of chaos in my personal life.
Exactly.
And that's
the same.
been, I didn't realise, and I wasn't diagnosed until I was in my late 30s, that's why I needed chaos. And in order to function well at work, there would be chaos, and a lot of it in my personal life. Just ridiculous things. I mean, you know, I brought children up, they went to 5 or 6 primary schools, I'd just be impulsive, move around, relationships had to have a lot of drama, to a lot of detriment and a lot of heartache. But on the surface, you wouldn't see that.
Yeah, same. It's
you wouldn't see
swan
that.
effect, isn't it?
Yeah. And then when I got to the point where I thought, actually, I'm going to put once I've realised I got ADHD, I thought I'm going to actually put all of that just back into the things that matter, because I could understand why I was doing it. And then I went on to do a master's, because I had actually the mental energy to do it rather than concentrating on chaos. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
It would just, and that's the way it's always been. And I think what you talk about with that insight into it, about understanding yourself and how it affects others, makes a massive difference. It really does.
There's an education piece there, isn't there?
Oh,
because
huge.
Both of you have been diagnosed late, so it must beg the question of what if I'd understood things earlier, and if that had come in, dare I say, in school, where you were diagnosed, and then actually you can process that behaviour, you can be educated to then not go through some really tough, challenging times, right? Why is it not in schools? Why is it not?
It's incredible, isn't it? And I taking that theme, I'm going to spin you into your other head, put your professional role on. You're an ADHD clinician, a very senior clinician, very learned. When Jordan was talking there, you took the conversation into your own lived experience, which was validating to hear. How often do you hear that story clinically? Every day. And what is that story normally all about, do you think?
It's about missed opportunities, lack of awareness and understanding. Like, you don't understand or you've not understood, put the pieces together until you get older, but neither do people around you either. So I work a lot with adults, and I love working with adults, work with adults and children, but adults have a longer story to tell. And although they're all very different, there's a lot of pattern recognition with that. So it is around, you know, this could have been picked up in school, or it could have been picked up as I've gone through education or in further education. And these patterns of failed relationships or difficulties in school and education, you have to get through all of that, I think, to understand the difficulties. But it's very, very common. Very common.
I think also, though, it's important to say that we're all responsible for our own lives, and we have to take something that I've learned from lots of failures and getting things wrong is that it's still only me that can change that. And you know, you've got to take full responsibility and accountability for whether it's for a diagnosis or whether it's for past relationship failures, because I also think there's a massively positive side to having ADHD, because I don't believe that I would be as successful in my chosen profession or career or the endeavours that I've carried out if I didn't have ADHD. Because if I've got something in my mind, I'm going to get it, I'm going to achieve it, and I'm going to be relentless in pursuit of whatever it is. And I think that is definitely part of that DNA makeup that the ADHD brings to the table. So as much as there are lots of negatives and perceived negatives that are spoken about, I think there's a massive superpower in there that's a gift in many ways as well.
And I'm going to say, no, the difficulty is, and you're right, and the difficulty is with the criterion, from a professional basis, we have to look at deficits in order to diagnose, and that's where it comes from. So, you know, and it's heartbreaking really, because actually, you know, I listen to somebody's life story, and I sit back every day and I think, wow, you've done incredible with all of this difficulty, because there is a struggle that runs alongside ADHD, and unfortunately with the criteria it is all looking at impairment, which is, it's hard because there's lots of people that have done amazing things in spite of their ADHD, and I think that's a message we've got to get the balance right. And often we don't.
Yeah, people don't tend to present in a clinical setting and say, I'm doing really well, I'm having an amazing life. No. Can you help me? Yeah. It's sort of it's the complete reverse, isn't it? And you're working clinically with people like Jordan on a daily basis. When you get to that stage of an assessment and a diagnosis, and then sharing that with the adult patient, I'm going to ask you, what did it feel like when somebody actually said to you, actually, Jordan, I think you've got ADHD? What was your feeling? And then I'm going to come back to you and sort of say, what's it like for you clinically?
It was like a relief. It was like almost like, I don't want to say justified, because that is not very responsible to say, but it made me understand that there was a reason for me being the way that I'd been, because I knew deep down, like, I just think of, for me, it's been tragic in a lot of, relationships, girlfriend, partners, things like that. I knew that I'm a good human who tries my best, but I would always be like told, oh, you're so selfish with your time, you never put time aside. And it sort of made sense. It doesn't excuse any of that, by the way, but it made sense that I could now understand that I have to be much more aware when I'm in the zone, that I need to step out of the zone, turn the phone off, close the laptop a bit, and go and spend time with the people that I care about. So it was more of a relief and helped me understand why I'm wired the way I am, I guess.
It explained a lot, wouldn't it? There's an irony, actually, because having met you previously and got to know you, you had a troubled youth. You were in trouble with the law, sitting next to an ex-copper, and you're not a bad person. So that sort of piecing it together, having been diagnosed just a year ago, probably explains a lot of the behaviour. Because you're talking about relationships, I can tell that's a real, sort of tragedy in your head. But going back to a young Jordan, you could have never been sat here. You could have gone in that much trouble. Could have manifested into something where you were basically locked up for a long time.
And a lot of my family members from estates that you would know very well, unfortunately, tragically for them, they stuck in that world of crime, drug use, spent many times in prison. And I was very fortunate, I believe, to have got out of that environment at 16 and joined the army, which then reshaped my world, the values that I hold, the opportunities that were presented to me. But those sorts of stories with ADHD or neurodiversity or mental health are in all sorts of poverty-stricken, under-deprived areas and towns around the country, around the world. And I think when you're in those sorts of, you've got enough challenges going on without the other challenges that are coming to the table. So it's like we were talking earlier about, you're often a product of your environment, and to change your outlook, your future, your attitude, you need to change the environment that you're in and extract out of there, I think.
And maybe the signal that there is something there that can help you understand the past, it gave you that relief, as you talked about. You do this on a daily basis, don't you? How do you feel as somebody who is neurodivergent, helping somebody by giving them that sort of explanation or what have you? What do you go through as a professional at that point?
I mean, to me, it's a privilege because, being on both sides, I mean, obviously with my the people that I treat, I don't always share. I may self-disclose to a professional point if I find it necessary, but it's, everybody describes the same thing, and it's validating for them because all of a sudden they understand the reasons, and it's not excuses, it's reasons. And I'll say that is a reason as to why these things have happened. And a lot of the time people get overwhelmed, they become emotional. I can empathise on a deeper level with those people because it's everything that I've been through as well, so I get it. And, as a person that's been undiagnosed for a long time, I just, without knowing about it, I didn't come out of the womb as an ADHD specialist. So I became an ADHD specialist, things became a lot clearer to me, and then I began to relate and think, actually, this is something I relate to. But for 30 years of my life, I just felt like I didn't belong in the world, or I felt as though I felt different and couldn't put a finger on that. You begin to ask yourself, why? It must be me, must be a personality thing. And like you said, I knew I weren't a bad person, but the decisions that I made were bad. They were bad. When you begin to understand why, you kind of then can look at yourself and think, this is where the personality ends and this is where the ADHD starts. This is an ADHD-driven decision. I got to the point where I think I made my life so small because I couldn't trust my own instinct. I don't know if you can relate to that, but I don't trust my own decisions. I don't trust the things that I'm choosing to do in life because they've not worked out, they've been wrong. Yeah. So I stopped doing it, stopped making decisions.
That is crazy. That exact sort of thought process that you talk about there is what really affected my mental health from a depression, anxiety, where I was like to the point of suicidal, where I thought, and I remember saying to I was sectioned with the NHS mental health crisis team, and I was saying to them, there's no point because whatever I do doesn't work. Like you were saying there about you just like resent yourself because you're like, well, what's the point? I've tried it. I'm 40 now, 41. If it doesn't work now, it's never going to work in a relationship or in me trying to do, because I know I'm doing my best, but it's still not working. And it's quite a depressing place to be where you're thinking, I'm doing my best in life, but I'm making a right mess of it.
And do you think that level that your mental health took at that point to then for somebody to understand why must just feel incredible, because I think that's what we're doing every day, isn't it? Making people feel that way, and that's how I felt. Absolutely, completely relate to that. I really do.
It's inspiration listening to both of you, and I think that's, you've both got diagnosed late in adult life, but flipping it back to a youngster being diagnosed that is looking forwards, and the word ADHD disorder, and we talked about this previously, where that's almost a negative. It's almost putting you into negative. You actually had relief. You could reflect and go, oh, that makes sense now. I can actually build from here. How do we change that perception of disorder? And I think you're both already doing that. You're talking from an inspirational, aspirational point of view. Is that what's needed from an educational point of view, for people to be diagnosed younger and then go, actually, this means I can understand it early and I can live a much better life than, dare I say, undiagnosed?
Yeah, I think absolutely. I think the earlier you can diagnose it or identify it, the more you can do to help that particular child or person. I speak to lots of parents actually who ask me about their kids who've got ADHD, and they're like, they don't really fit in the school system. It's not really designed for them. And it just made me think of my own experiences, because I couldn't think of any place worse to be, even now, than sat in a room looking at a screen for an hour 6 times a day.
Yeah, you're looking out the window at school and dreaming of,
I'm playing football. Or
and look how that's manifested to climbing every mountain in bare feet and so on,
but you don't, and not that education is really important. It's crucial in all society and community, but it's not the be all and end all. And education doesn't have to come through an orthodox method of school and classrooms. There's lots of ways that you can learn in life. So I also think that if you haven't done well at school, or school's not going great, we're told by society you're a failure, when actually that is far from the reality. There's so many amazing opportunities, and some of the leading politicians, world leaders, elite sports stars, they've all been diagnosed with these things later in life. Not all of them, lots of them, and they've all gone on to incredible, amazing things. And some of them, you look at the traits of impulsive decision making, risk taking, a lot of entrepreneurs as well, who make decisions and take risks that maybe your normal person might not, because it'd be too risk averse or whatever. So I do think there is lots of benefits, but we got to remove a lot of the stigma and the labels attached to it first, I think.
How do you feel? I think you describe yourself as a professional adventurer now, having been a soldier and giving your time for Queen and country. How do you think the knowledge that you now have, that you have ADHD, supports you in the adventures you're going to do going forward?
Well, I look at the things like, the hyper focus. I dream big still as an adult. In my head, I'm still a teenager who I can conquer the world, and I set my sights on a goal, and I will do everything I can to make that happen. Even my friends say, you got to raise $250,000 to make this happen. How are you going to do that? I don't know how I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it, and I'm going to make it happen. And I think purpose is a big thing for a lot of people who have ADHD. It's like you need a reason and a drive to want to get out of bed and do whatever it is that you're doing. I think a lot of the people I've spoke to, and certainly myself with people with ADHD, it's like you can't just, a lot of people in the world are in jobs that they don't really enjoy, but it just pays the bills. For me, I've got to be really engaged and interested by it, else I'm not even turning up. I'm like 100% or zero. There's no just plodding along cruising. But I think that's, again, it's a positive to me. I really take a lot of growth value from ADHD. I try not to think of it as I'm unlucky or it's something negative. I feel like it's a blessing in many ways.
You were agreeing there, weren't you?
It's all or nothing, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all or nothing. I completely get it. If there's nothing to do and it's nothing that's stimulating to you, then do nothing.
Yeah. And if I'm at a dinner, people will say to me, like my girlfriends in the past will say, you weren't enjoying that conversation. It's like written all over your face, you're bored, aren't you? You're like, and it's like, and I've become more aware of that now, and I have to put on a few smiles and what have you, but if I'm not engaged or not interested in something, it's very difficult to change that in my mind. And that's like education at school though. If, like sitting there learning about, I don't know, Pythagoras and algebra and Bunsen burners, which I've never used in my life, by the way, but I'm sat there having to study these things, and it's like, what am I doing here?
It's referred to in another session that we've recorded as interest-led behaviour, and that was the first time I'd ever heard that, and I did ask for permission to steal that with pride.
I like that. That's a good one.
It really is, isn't it? And you say it's all or nothing. Well, if there's no interest, it's nothing. And you know, we talk about children, and we'll talk about children in a second. We talk about children having learning difficulties because they've got ADHD, which I violently disagree with. I think they've got difficulties learning in the current system, and it's for the system to change, which plays back into it. So it's not a learning difficulty, it is a difficulty learning. And when you said, you said, and if you don't succeed, those kids feel a sense of failure. Actually, it's a system, it's the process of getting them educated that's failed, isn't it? If you can take a bunch of kids, as you do, away on an adventure, canoeing, kayaking, walking, whatever, and they're being educated in leadership and appropriate behaviour and those kind of life skills.
But even in academic skills, you know, if like we look at like STEM subjects like science, tech, engineering, maths, if you're going to climb a mountain, if you're going to row across a stretch of ocean, guess what? You need speed, times, distance. You need biology. You need human biology, marine biology. You know, you need engineering. How's your boat going to float? What's the buoyancy? How's the engineering behind that work? Technology. I need GPSs. I need data being fed to me. That's a lot more interesting than doing textbook work. But it's still the same outcome. You're still learning. In fact, even more relevant because you're learning skills that you're actually going to apply to real life and real world situations. So I think context is everything for learning. And it's like same with, you know, sport and PE, you know, the benefits are often overlooked in a lot of schools for getting people outside in school time, you know, because unfortunately for teachers in the education system, they're so driven by data, targets and results. It's not focused on the individual learners. It's more about what our Ofsted grade's going to be or whatever it is. And that doesn't help the individual, that helps the school and the reputation, but it's not helping the learner. I see a lot more schools doing things like values-based learning now, so it's not, the focus isn't on the qualification, it's on about making that a good human, you know, making better decisions, leadership, management, courage, respect, discipline, selfless commitment, loyalty, things that are gonna make you survive in life, you know, unlike a maths lesson or whatever it might be.
Bunsen burner.
Yeah, the Bunsen burner.
What do you find with children clinically in relating to that in terms of the struggles they're having?
I think well, it varies from person to person, obviously, but I think the majority of it is around, you know, classrooms are about teaching the majority, aren't they? So we're looking at a minority population of people with ADHD, autism that have to fit into this environment that's not for them. And that's the first thing that you hear with children, because they become they're removed, because actually what a teacher needs to do is get on with everybody else that's going to sit there for 8 hours and not chuck a ball at somebody's head or whatever, you know, or they've been daydreamy. So they're seen as the problem, and that's the same thing that you're saying, really, that it's not, why don't we have a look at why that child is struggling or why they're not able to sit through those lessons rather than just removing them and punishing. And that still does happen, unfortunately. And I think for me, my experience of working with children and my own children is it varies area to area, and I've had some great examples in school where without a diagnosis, children have been allowed movement breaks, or they can do this, or they can move around, and it helps them massively. They don't realise the impact of those small changes, but not every school does that.
No. Things like forest schools we're seeing now.
Brilliant, aren't
Amazing.
they?
What a great
idea.
Get outside for 45 minutes, an hour, and you know, the benefits, both physically and mentally, to the child are immense, incredible.
It's the practical element. It's been taught to make something that actually has a use, and you can put it into physical implementation.
And it's like we were in a school the other day, they were talking about like climate change, for example, and instead of just talking about it in the classroom, what they were doing, they were going down to a busy road and they were looking at the cars and how much, you know, exhaust fumes were coming out. And I just thought, what a great thing to show them how that applies to the real world as opposed to reading it out of a book.
Yeah.
Just, it doesn't take a lot, it's just a bit of creativity, a bit of innovation.
You'd have seen this from the work you've done with the cadets as well, right?
Oh yeah, some of the best cadets in the world are some of the worst pupils in school. You know, I meet so many cadets who have been kicked out of school, expelled, detention every week, but they'll be the first on parade, the smartest, the most respectful, the most disciplined, the politest, the kindest. And you're like, something's not right here, because that is not the same kid that I'm reading about over here. And the balance is, you know, and all it is, it's just a different environment. And they're flourishing here, but they're not over here.
So I know the answer to this question, but I want you to tell me and the people watching this, what is your role with cadets? Because I'm fascinated by that.
Yeah, so I'm very proud to be the National Ambassador for the Army Cadets, which is one of the UK's largest youth organisations. And yeah, we, contrary to popular belief, we're not here to try and recruit young soldiers or anything. We are a youth organisation that happens to be sponsored by the MOD, and our job is to try and inspire through fun, friendship, action and adventure as many young people as possible between the ages of 11 and 18. And yeah, ultimately it's about developing good citizens, giving them the life skills, and we do all that by sort of trying to encourage 6 core values: the courage, respect, integrity, loyalty, discipline, selfless commitment. And they're the same values that I was taught as a 16-year-old. And I always think they're like the best decision-making tool you can have, because you always know if you're doing right or wrong. You always know if you're on the right path. And it doesn't always mean because you've got strong values you're not going to fail or you're going to get things wrong, but it means that you've got a compass that you can slowly bring yourself back to and hopefully learn and grow from, those things you might have not got right the first time.
How much neurodiversity do you think you see in that cluster of people then?
Oh, lots. Yeah, lots. We represent all of society, but particularly in quite challenging, underfunded, deprived areas as well, where many children, have not done well at school or aren't doing well for the reasons that we've discussed today. But the Cadets is one of many organisations actually that provides another outlet for education in a very different setting and a different environment. And there's of course lots like the Scouts, the Guides, the Beavers, the Cubs, various disciplines of cadets from across all services, and they're all incredible and they all give another option on education. And what's amazing is the voluntary organisations as well. So that child who might not be doing great at school or might not even be allowed to go to school anymore, he's volunteering to spend his Tuesday night, his Thursday night and all his weekend learning. Yeah. So again, it just tells you that something's not right somewhere. Yeah.
If there was a core message for you to have an opportunity to talk to whoever, who would be the influencing people that you'd want to give a message to about we've got to respect neurodiversity more, we've got to catch it more, respect it more? What would be your mission there? Who and why? You were nodding there. How do you think we can make a difference? Who would it be with?
I mean, there are lots of ways. From a personal perspective, it still would be schools, because I think that's a battle. I've got a child that's autistic and a child that has ADHD, and I have it's a battle still, even. And I think for myself, like I've got I've got more insight and more experience of ADHD and autism because I'm a professional in that field, and still it's a battle to me and my children. And how's that the case? So I think about people that are not a clinician or not a person working in this field of expertise. How do they navigate all of this? Because it's hard enough for us. And I'm still having to go, and I still get the sense that, they don't want to understand it, or they want to ignore it or downplay it, because it's not to be accepted in a school environment, because it becomes a problem, and that's really difficult. My youngest son, when I spoke to him about his autism, he just wanted to know what it was, and I just said it means your brain works differently and you may therefore feel differently every day. And he said, I get that, that's exactly how I feel. And I thought that's a really important message for him, because he goes to school wondering every day why he's different. And he's different in a way that's important to him. And if we look at the strengths of what he can do, he's going to do great things, but that's going to be down to me, unfortunately. I think at this moment in time, not the educational system, and that makes me feel really sad, because he's got lots of great things that he could do with his life, and I'm sure that he will.
That's with me advocating. The education curriculum and the system, it's not necessarily fit for purpose, right? The analogy of the cadets being the best you could see and they're failing in school, that's evidence in itself, isn't it?
Well, what's he passionate about? Football, isn't it?
He's passionate about football. He's tried a long time to get into grassroots football. We've tried lots of teams, but his social skills just aren't quite at a level whereby he finds that easy. He gets quite upset easy. He's quite sensitive. He likes the rules, and if people don't play by the rules, he gets quite upset. And it's not very inclusive for him. But he's found, I found a football team that's looking at children with neurodiverse conditions. So we approached them, he plays for them, and he did the first session. I wasn't there, my partner took him, and he rung me up and he was just in tears. He just said, I've never seen him look so happy. He's happy when he plays football, but I've never seen him look so happy. And when I asked him about it when he came home, he was really articulate, my boy. He said, I belong there in that football team. And I thought that's important to him. It doesn't matter whether he can play football or not, but he needs the same opportunity as everybody else. He's great at football actually, but the other side of the the other side of his, his difficulties make it harder for him to navigate. So his football team are outstanding, not because they're going to go on to be the best footballers in the world. It doesn't matter. He's enjoying sport. He does it in the way that he likes. The coach in a very different way, a very kind way, and an empathetic way, and that works for him. And he feels, more importantly, above all of that, he feels like he belongs there. So that's good.
And I could feel that resonating with you, and your non-verbals were saying that was resonating, if I've caught that right. And
Yeah, absolutely. I just think you talked about there the sense of belonging, and I think that's really powerful and really important, not just for young children, but for adults as well. I think it's certainly something, again, going back to the cadets, so they talk a lot about being part of a family, that there is no judgmental, it doesn't matter social status, background, qualifications, experience, we're all the same. And that's one of the positive things about wearing a uniform. It creates that sense of belonging in any uniformed environment, I think, which is always a positive thing.
who would you reach out to change things, do you think?
I think it's a tough one. I think, as you say, the schools and the Department for Education have a huge responsibility there, I think. But I also think there's a lot, the world we live in now, we live in a very, dare I say, sort of celebrity culture-driven environment where people who have large influence, follow accounts, can do a lot of good in the world. And I think that a lot of these sorts of people have to take some responsibility and accountability. I'm always horrified by people who come out of these reality TV shows with millions of followers that children are looking to as potential role models, but there's nobody accounting for what these people and the messages are pushing out there to society. So I've always felt that these so-called influencers, celebrities, people who have got huge profiles, often bigger than politicians, decision makers, business leaders, I think that these sorts of people could do a lot of good in the world and influence a lot of change with key policymakers. So I challenge any celebrity influencer that's watching to, somebody maybe who's been affected by ADHD or autism, to use their platform and profile to try and drive some change and create a movement.
It's a good shout, and it needs to be authentic rather than a
desire
to make more money, more followers.
Exactly.
It's got to be, this is from my lived experience, this is why I want to
And that's probably why it's got to be someone who's experienced it themselves.
Yeah, is there anyone that springs to mind? Just out of interest, there's people that have only just been recently diagnosed, there's people that probably haven't been diagnosed, but is there anyone right out there that you can both think of that represents that well?
I don't off the top of my head, I don't think there is.
That's interesting in itself, right? Because there will be.
Well,
they're not talking about it.
We might be on a journey to find them, mightn't
Yes,
we?
exactly.
And it might, because of the stigmas, it might not be something that people want to, we're very comfortable talking, but that might be, dare I say, brand damaging or perceived to be in their mind.
Even if they want to, there could be a PR or media person in who is saying, that's not good for where we're at right now, maybe do it in a couple of years' time. So, reasons to not do it.
Back to shame, isn't it?
Yeah.
We talked about shame previously. We haven't talked about it so much in this environment today here with you guys. But people are still, mental ill health, the lack of mental well-being still seems to be coupled up with shame.
Yeah.
And we've got to change that. We with the work that you do clinically and the way you've just spoken so articulately and passionately about family and your own lived experience and your lived experience, and we got to change, and we've got to take shame out of this. And there's no shame in having a broken arm. Why is there shame in having a bit of a mindset that's not quite right, that somebody needs to help you fix? And that's the mission. We talk about it a lot. We use that word, don't we, a lot? The mission. That's what's
brought us all together today. And I think it's a vulnerability, particularly in men as well, soldier, and then from a clinician point of view, where you could give out authoritative, again, clinically correct information, but also then bring your personal journey into that. It's powerful, and if that's being talked about more, that's only going to start more of a movement.
We've got to just do what we're doing now. We've got to keep talking, and if certainly as an ex-frontline soldier and as an extreme adventurer, if I can tell you that I've got issues and challenges and, I cry in my pillow sometimes because I'm upset, any kid should be able to do that and talk openly. There shouldn't be any stigma attached to it.
I love that. And at the same time, climb Mount Kilimanjaro in barefoot and do Antarctica next year on an unclimbed peak, right? That's super hardcore, but to be vulnerable at the same time, that's what's needed.
Do you still have a vulnerability, even though you're a big, rough, tough? You're as rough and tough as they come. Well, you are, outwardly, physically, But emotionally, I suspect there is still a vulnerability
massive.
there.
I've many a night have a little cry to myself sometimes, but I'm not ashamed to say that. Sometimes I get emotional, sometimes I sit there, and sometimes I cry and I don't even know why I'm crying. You know, I've had various occasions where I've been lying in my bed and I'm upset, and I'm like, I don't even know why I'm upset. What am I upset for? What's wrong with me? You know, I've got all these good things in my life, and that's just life. Life can be tough sometimes. Life can be challenging, but it's also what makes us more resilient. It's also how we learn and grow. And I try not to think too far ahead because it causes me anxiety sometimes, and I try definitely not to dwell on the past because that leads to a lot of depression for me. I just try to have a growth mindset where I'm constantly learning. And I think if you're vulnerable and if you're honest, nothing can really ever get you or catch you out because you're just accepting you are who you are. And if you're open with people and you're true to them and you're true to yourself, so what? That's me. You know, it's if I need to chat to you, I need to chat. If we need to go and have a walk and a coffee on our own, you know, just be honest, talk to people. You know, and most of the time what I find, especially when I talk in businesses and things, I'll go to a business or even a school and I'll talk about my adventures or my expeditions. I'll touch on mental health for a couple of minutes maybe. And all the questions that come at the end of those sessions always come about mental health. So, and everyone wants to talk about it and ask questions, and the curiosity's there, which tells me that everybody is having dark days now and again. And that's all right, it's human, we're all human. You know, we can't always be motivated every day. Nobody, it doesn't matter if you're an Olympic gold medalist, a Premier League footballer, you know, you're leading a country, you will not be motivated every day because you're human, which is what we were talking about earlier. You can be disciplined though, and you can still get up on those ugly days when put your clothes on and turn up, which is hard sometimes, but you know, that's what discipline taught us, certainly in the military and things. It's, you know, doing the things that you don't really want to do, but need to be done sometimes.
You would agree with that?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think you've got to, I feel exactly the same. You know, in some senses, I feel as I'm smashing it at life, you know, like every day, pat myself on the back. And I was telling Phil the other day, so we're on a plane on a flight back from Dallas the other week. It's a really silly story, but I think it just makes perfect sense. So I sat on the plane and they give out the food tray and they'd missed the crackers off my food tray. And instead of just like being a big girl, put my hand up and say, I've missed my crackers, I cried. And I cried for like, I thought, there's nobody here, I'm just going to sit and cry. And I cried on the plane. Thankfully, everybody else were asleep, and because I can't sleep, I'm just sat awake for 8 hours. And then I got off and I thought, what were I crying over crackers for? But actually, it was the entire thing. Oh, I'm here, I'm on this plane. This is a long time, I'm 8 hours, everybody's asleep, I can't get to sleep. And then the crackers, do you know what I mean? And it was just like, it's all come.
Straw.
That was a final straw, and I still didn't get my crackers. I just sat and cried.
I'm going to buy you some crackers later.
Just cheap, they were just cheap crackers.
That's interesting because there's so many things that could be misunderstood with behaviour.
Yeah.
Like you recognise it, you sort of dwelled on it, and then you processed
Overwhelmed.
it. It's the whole overwhelming,
Yeah.
Exactly. How many people are having that happen into life and they're being judged at that moment for how they behave or what they're doing, which is a much bigger picture and a culmination of different things that come down. And then don't feel comfortable, they can actually then be vulnerable about that, because it might be that you need to explain that, you know, going back to your youth, you know, you didn't know why you were doing certain things, you were just angry, you were confused. But if you can piece this all together and be educated with it, which is really what we're talking about here, and then actually come to terms with it, process it and think forwards positively, that's what we're all trying to achieve.
Isn't it great? We've got two extremely, if I can say it in my appreciation, two very strong people, two people that are achieving at the top of the game, but there's still that layer of vulnerability. And you can both articulate that vulnerability. And you'd already articulated Crackergate to me at work as colleagues. and I just think it's a life lesson for people watching this, that no matter how good you are, how professional you are, how much you are at the top of your game, still being able to find someone, find your person, find your tribe where you can still be true and authentic to yourself and say, not having crackers on my plane on the way back from America from a life-changing work event got me crying and I don't know why. We can laugh and joke, but that's almost like hiding. But actually there's a real positive there that you've got to position in life where you can talk that through.
Well, I processed it. That's what I did. And, you know, there's not, you know, it's a silly story, but actually what happened was I gave myself permission in that moment in time to be upset about all the things. And it wasn't the crackers, it was everything that were going off that was too much. You know, so I checked my environment, I was fine. I didn't want an arm around me or anything like that. I just wanted a moment to myself, and then I was fine. But yeah, it's giving yourself permission, isn't it, at those times.
Very off topic, but I read a book a couple of years ago about a tribe in Peru, and they believe like that when you eject emotion from your body, like tears or anger or things, or be sick or anything like that, it's like releasing all the toxins, so it's like it's seen as a very positive thing to have a cry now and again. And I really like that, you know, it's removing all that negative energy, ready so you can be refreshed and revitalised.
Released.
Yeah.
I just think that's a brilliant, actually, I don't know about you, John, but I think that's a brilliant way to end this out, in authenticity with ourselves and giving ourselves permission to be the people that we are. You have this great expression, you live your life and I'll live mine.
It's not that. You got it wrong.
Go on. You be you and I'll be me.
You've got it wrong again.
Right.
It's just you do you. You do you.
Yeah.
And I'll do me.
Yeah.
And that's it. And if that works for you, that's fine.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Thanks,
Brilliant.
guys. It's been really...
No, thank you.
Thank you.
I guess that's why I'm such a great home asker. Like, nobody knows the internal hyperactivity that goes on in my brain.
But from an evolutionary point of view, these things exist for a reason, otherwise evolution would have weeded them out. So probably a better and deeper question is, why do we have ADHD? Like, what is it for?